We're going to do another live reading today of the Haunted Pendant from my look at me messing up already. From my Paranormal Artifacts series. I have Enchanted Coast on the brain because I'm plotting one right now. I'm plotting actually three right now. I'm doing an Enchanted Coast. I have my new Shot of Midlife Magic book that my sister and I are working on. And I'm also finishing up Soulkeeper. That's with Kira, who was just featured in my last Keyhole book, which also released a couple days ago, Mocha's a Murder. So if you want to check it out, and Soulkeeper should be out in the next 2 weeks. I'm almost finished with it. And send it off to the proofers, and I'm going to put it live. It's not available for pre-order. It's just going to be, an instant publishing, but I'll let you guys know as soon as it does. First, welcome. I'm glad to see everybody, and I will get right to it. Okay, we're at chapter 5 right now. That's where we left off last time. So, as soon as we were back to shore, if you remember, they had just found the trunk and they had gotten it onto the boat. So that's where we left off at. As soon as we were back to shore, I tried to call my dad again. It went straight to voicemail, so I left him a message. It wasn't unusual for him to shut his phone off when he was researching or dealing with clients, so I wasn't too surprised. "How about I toss that in my pickup and give you two a lift to your shop?" Larry asked. We left my Mustang at the Cozy Clam because parking at the marina was a pain, and the truck wouldn't have fit in it. The trunk wouldn't have fit in it anyway. "That'd be awesome," I said, smiling at him. I glanced around to make sure there were no non-magical eyes around, then levitated the trunk off the boat, surprised when it gave a little tug of resistance. It was like I was pulling it against the wind, and I wondered if maybe Larry had been right and we should have just dumped it back where we found it. Too late now, though. My family's business, simply known as Parker's Inc., was located in an area called Old Town that leaned toward more refined, well-to-do customers. By careful design, the area attracted foot traffic, and though there was still a significant pirate and sea ambiance, it was present in kitschy art galleries, artisanal jewelry shops, and spendy seafood bistros. The town's designers had made it the perfect area for shopping and spending time enjoying the Florida sun. There was a huge green on the opposite side of the street from the shops that had a rose garden at one end and two separate fountains, as well as a paved walking path that circled the whole thing. Old oaks dotted the grounds, and there were benches placed under them in case you'd like to take a seat in the shade to rest or reflect while you watched the water spout from a mermaid's mouth. And just as a note, that is actually a real place. I based it on a place in here locally in Winter Park, Florida. It's gorgeous, and it's one of my favorite places that I used to love hanging out when I lived down there. Sorry to interrupt, and I will get back to it. It wasn't exactly my cup of tea, but considering it paid the bills, I was willing to deal with it. Even though I preferred the area by the beach with its weather-hewn planks and corny shops, who was I to complain about working in such a great place, even if it was a little too upscale for me? My twin brother Jacob was working when we pulled up to the back entrance of the shop. He must have seen us go past the front because we'd no sooner parked than he was dropping the tailgate. I smiled when I saw him. Even though he was infuriating, he was one of my two favorite people in the world. He was also the male version of me, chestnut hair with strands of red brought out in the sunshine, green eyes, and a fair complexion, though he tanned much easier than I did. Also like me, his style vacillated between beach bum and rebel depending on how hot it was outside. Unlike me, his hair was his natural color, whereas mine was currently hot pink. "What you got there?" he asked, reaching a long tanned arm in to loosen the straps holding the trunk tight to the tailgate. He touched the box with his elbow and jerked back, rubbing it. "Oh, wow, seriously, what is that?" I drew my brows together and rushed around the truck to him. "We found it buried out on the shoals. Why? What happened?" He shook his head as if to clear it. Nothing really. There's just some serious juju in there, and not the good kind, I don't think. It was buried? Eli nodded. The storm must have shifted the sand enough for our detectors to find it. We've scoured those shoals 100 times. For what it's worth, I got the same feeling. Is Dad here? I asked as Eli and Jacob pulled the trunk from the bed of the truck. Nope, Jake replied. He went up the coast to St. Pete to meet a potential client. He won't be back until day after tomorrow at the earliest, because he decided to go on up to Panama City. His buddies up there stumbled onto some stuff at an estate sale that they asked him to look at, paintings and whatnot. My father was respected, not just around the area, but around the world for his knowledge of arcane artifacts and unusual antiques. And it wasn't unusual of him to be gone for a few days or even a week out of every month on such excursions. The timing for such a trip was a pain this time, but it was what it was. I walked ahead of them and opened the back door. Let's get it inside then. I'm sure between the three of us we can figure something out. I turned to Larry, who'd stayed in the truck. You're sure you don't want to come in? He waved me off, disappointment etched on his face. I'd love to, but I'm already pushing it with my time. Maris will skin me if I'm not there on time in the morning. And I told Ace down at the bait shop that I'd help him empty his tanks this evening. Y'all go ahead, but send me those pictures. Sure thing, I said, smiling. Thanks for taking us out and for the ride home. See you when you get back. I held the back door to the shop open while the guys finagled the trunk through. There were way too many people around to risk magicking it in. Wow, whatever's in here is heavy, Jake said, groaning as they set it down on the floor beside my workbench. My brother brushed his hands off and then took a couple steps back to examine the trunk. Just like the rest of us, he was well versed in antiques. What do you think? He asked. 18th century at the latest. It's a little hard to tell because it's so plain. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If it were from much later than that, it'd probably have some travel stamps on it. I traced my fingers around the edges. The problem is that even if we knew exactly where the trunk was made, there's no way to tell when it sunk. It could have been brand new when it went down, or it could have been in somebody's family for ages. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and tried to call my dad again. Just as before, it went straight to voicemail. I snapped a couple pictures of the trunk and texted them to him, along with a brief message telling him where I'd found it. Sighing, I hit send. Dad still not answering? Jake asked. Eli flapped a hand at me. He's probably in a meeting or going through a dead spot. You know how spotty service can be along some of those backwoods roads up there. Why is it so important for you to talk to Dad? Jake asked, leaning against the corner of a wooden shelf stuffed full of all sorts of antique trinkets. Unless I'm mistaken, he puts you in charge of cursed items for one reason. You're better at it than any of us. Even him, and he knows it. He had a point. Even if I did manage to get a hold of Dad, he'd just tell me to do my thing. So I did. Stand back, I said, then closed my eyes and pulled my magic to my fingers. I uttered a reveal spell and was surprised to find that though there was a protection spell in the trunk, I didn't pick up so much as a whiff of any sort of curse. I carefully unwound it, then checked it again before I gave a decisive nod. The trunk's clean, guys. No magic left on it. Eli's face lit up like a kid's at Christmas, and Jake rubbed his hands together. Okay then, my brother said, his green eyes sparkling with excitement. Let's see what booty y'all found. He pulled a set of lockpicks from one of the cubbies above the work table and squatted down in front of the chest. We were both a fair hand at picking locks, a skill that came in handy when you dealt with old jewelry boxes, diaries, and chests that required keys that were long gone, but he was much better at it than I was. I held my breath as he stuck the picks in, and Eli squeezed my hand, every bit as anxious as I was to finally see what was in the trunk. After just a few seconds, a metallic click sounded, and Jake grinned with satisfaction as he lifted the lid. I wasn't sure what I'd expected, but it wasn't what I saw. Jake sucked in a breath as the afternoon sun glinted off a strange array of pieces that just didn't go together at all. It was like somebody had just dumped random stuff into the box. It was hard to take it all in at once, but the first items that jumped out at me were a tarnished silver gravy boat, a man's pocket watch, an old oil lantern, and, weirdly enough, an antique copper bed warmer. Eli glanced at me, his brow furrowed. That's a strange mix of stuff, isn't it? I nodded as Jake placed both his hands over the box and muttered a spell. Golden magic glowed from his palms, pulsing a little before it turned to wisps and snaked down into the box. I started to stop him because I was worried, but he shook his head. As bad as we both hated to admit it sometimes, we did have that weird mental twin bond going, and I suspected it was even stronger than most because we were magical. It wasn't like we could read each other's minds. It was more like sometimes we just knew what the other was thinking. While he did his thing, Eli and I stepped closer to get a better look at the contents. The edge of a purple violet bag peeked out from beneath the bed warmer, and my heart skipped a little. Based on the age of the other items, something in a bag like that was likely valuable. My gaze wandered over more of the contents: an ornate silver mirror, a small wooden jewelry box, and a tortoiseshell snuff box. There were simply too many items to list. All in all, there had to be at least 30 or 40 pieces of miscellaneous household items, jewelry, and personal items stuffed in there. The glow subsided from Jake's hands, and he rocked back on flip-flop clad heels and pushed to a standing position, his face twisted in thought. Well, Eli asked, more impatient than I was, did you find anything? Jake nodded, confusion giving way to concern. More than one thing, actually, and none of it good. They all seem to hold a different type of magic. I blew a breath out between my cheeks and shook my head. Then I'll have to go over each piece. I don't have the headspace for that today, and I don't want to get partway through and have to quit because I got tired. I'll do it in the morning. I need to clean some space anyway, so I'll go over the stuff I promised Willow I'd get to, so she can take everything out front. Then I'll have plenty of room to unpack everything from the trunk without mixing it up with items we already had. Need some help? Eli asked, but I shook my head. Nah, I replied, my attention's still on the items in the trunk. The longer I looked, the more I found, and I hated that I wasn't going to be able to get to it immediately. Still, I wanted to keep them all separate and also make sure that I didn't accidentally leave any trace of magic behind. So it was best to get to the other items out of the way first and start with a clear head the next morning. You go do your thing. Didn't you promise your mom you'd have dinner with her? Yeah, he said, sighing and stuffing his hands in the pockets of his board shorts. And I already put her off once this week. She's going to get a complex if I do it again. Jake said, bumping Eli with his elbow. You love your mom. She's awesome and you know it. Shoot, if you don't want to go to dinner with her, I will. Is she cooking or are you going out? Eli smiled. She's cooking. Shrimp risotto. My mouth watered at the thought. Eli's mom was one of the hippest people I knew and an amazing cook. She wasn't one of those moms who tried to be cool. She was just naturally that way. As an earth witch, she was in tune with the world around her, and it showed. She had a heart the size of Texas, but like Eli, she had a temper. She was kind, but she was nobody's doormat. Why are we standing here then? I asked, only half joking. Why aren't we all headed to your place? Sophia's risotto was legendary. Eli grinned like the Cheshire cat. Because you have work to do, and she's my mom. If there's a limited supply of her risotto, I always get dibs, and she's only counting on me coming tonight. He pulled me into a hug and dropped a kiss on my forehead. Don't play with the sharp new toys. until somebody's here with you, like me, tomorrow. And also, don't forget I have to drop my car off to get the oil changed in the morning. You promised to pick me up. I frowned and glanced toward the box. I wanted to at least pull everything out of the trunk because I was dying to see what was in it. And me, Jake said, leveling his most serious look at me. I don't want you to pull a Dumbledore and get some kind of curse, and I'm also nosy. I want to help dig through it for the first time. We'll meet you here in the morning. Say 10? I have something to do first. Eli nodded. 10 works for me. That gives us time to drop the car off and grab breakfast and coffee. Aside from that, my day is a blank slate. He turned to me. Meet me at Joe's at 9. Deal, I said. Patience was not one of my virtues, but this time I had no choice. Okay, that's the end of chapter 5. I'll pop over and see what everybody has to say. Hey, April. Hey, Mike. Mike, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're reading. He says he's reading about 80% through my latest Keyhole Lake book. I just released it in ebook form, and it's called Mocha's a Murder. I hope you're loving it, Mike. Hey, April. Oh, you're a new subscriber. Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Do you just listen to the audio, or do you read ebooks too, or paperbacks? There's Renee. Hey, Renee. Glad to see you again. Oh, thanks, Mike. Mike says all my books are awesome. And there's Jennifer. She's the illustrious better part of our writing team. She's my co-writer with the Paranormal Women's Fiction books. Oh, okay. April says she's been listening to my Keyhole Lake. Can you guys see the chat, or am I the only one that can see it? I'm new to this game, so I'm not sure. Okay. Okay, great. Renee said, okay, good. I didn't know if I needed to keep telling you guys what you're sharing the conversation with you so nobody was left out, or if oh, thanks a lot. Thanks, April. That would be awesome. I really appreciate your guys' support, especially, I'm just now getting the channel up and going, and, I see a lot of the faces here that I see, on Facebook, and I have, just so you know, you guys are the most amazing people on the planet. I adore you, and I couldn't be the success that I am without you. So, let's move on to chapter 6. I tossed and turned half the night because I couldn't get the trunk off my mind. I'd gone back to the shop the night before and cleared all the backlog pieces so Willow could put them out. When my alarm finally went off at 7, I was already up and drinking my first cup of coffee. Holy cow, a deep voice said. The Princess of the Night is awake already? Is today the day you've chosen for world domination? I glanced up from playing Pokemon Go on my phone. My oldest brother, Connell, paused on his way to the coffee pot to drop a kiss on the top of my head. He was 8 years older than I was, and by far the most responsible of the 6 of us, except for maybe Willow. Though she was responsible more because she was OCD than anything else. Her brain simply wouldn't let her be irresponsible. Connell did it on purpose. He was also my second favorite sibling. Hey, brother, I said, grinning. I thought you were out of town. He shook his head, and a dark lock fell over green eyes that matched mine to a T. Somehow, everybody but Willow had gotten Dad's dark looks, and we were all so similar that there was no denying we were siblings. It was one of the reasons I liked to keep my hair pink or purple or blue rather than chestnut. Nope, Marshall went out with him. It's mostly Victorian stuff. He wrinkled his aristocratic nose. Too tame for my blood. Though we all played a part in the family business, we each had our own area of interest. Connell's was the medieval period, with a specialization in weaponry, though he knew a boatload about weapons from just about any era. Personally, I'd studied the Renaissance with a concentration on colonial America, though I thought medieval period was cool too. I had an ever-changing list of what I'd take if I ever had the chance to time travel back to those periods and could only take 10 things with me. It had started with just 5, but I'd kept cheating by mentally stuffing extra items in my bodice. Guess what we found on our dive yesterday? I said. Like me, he loved found things. As kids, we used to make up stories about different pieces we'd find at the beach, and he'd loved exploring with me. Connell was the one who'd introduced me to diving, and it was a love we still shared. What? He asked, popping a pot in the coffee maker and sliding his cup under it. A trunk. I started to tell him about it, but his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and held up a finger as he slid to take the call. It was apparently business because he answered a few questions, then agreed to meet them for coffee. Sorry, kiddo, he said when he hung up. That was Marley Wilkins. I've had him on the hook for a month for a Knights Templar sword, and he's finally decided to pull the trigger. I'm meeting him before he changes his mind. The one with the sapphire in the hilt? I asked, excitement coursing through me. That sword was one of the finest, most well-preserved pieces I'd ever seen. The collector in me wept a little at the thought of losing it. That's the one, he said, dumping his coffee into a to-go cup and blurping some cream into it. I want to hear about this trunk, though. I'll stop by the shop later. He swept out the kitchen door and into the foyer. When the screen door slapped shut behind him, I smiled into the empty space. I didn't blame him. The price tag on that sword would make me run out the door, too. Wow, do you know how to clear a room? A gravelly voice said, and I rolled my eyes when Axel, a spotted skunk who'd attached himself to my grandmother decades ago, yes, decades, hopped up onto the chair beside me. Skunks typically didn't live that long, but the best answer I ever got from him about his past was that he wasn't just any old skunk. That was true. He talked a lot, drank, and was a fair hand at poker. He also had magic of his own, though it was different from a witch's magic. That's me. Oh, whoops. That's me, I said, smiling at him. Miss Congeniality. What's up? He climbed onto the table and grabbed a kiwi out of the fruit bowl. I'm starving, he said, leaning back on his haunches and taking a big bite out of the green fruit. Juice ran down his black chin, and he twitched his whiskers at me. Unlike the signature dual white stripes that most people associated with skunks, Axel's fur was more variegated. He was black, but his stripes sort of ran all over his body willy-nilly, and he was more the size of a large ferret. His bushy tail was black down the bone, but fanned out into a fluffy white plume, and he had a dime-sized white dot right between his shiny black eyes. In short, he was cute, and he knew it. He was also sarcastic, catty, funny, and loyal, which meant he fit into our family like a glove. Rough night? I asked, and he lifted a furry shoulder. Not really, he replied, licking juice off his left paw. I was down at the Jolly Roger, and we played a few hands of 5-card. The Jolly Roger was a local dive bar. A guy named Bert owned it, and he was known for wings, cold beer, and after-hour poker games that would go on all night. How much did you get him for? I asked. Fortunately, Axel had very little use for money, so he usually played for food or booze or random pocket items to hide in his closet stash. He puffed up a little and flicked his tail. Started with a free beer and a serving gator tail, but by the end of the night, he was into me for 2 bottles of Jameson, 3 dinners, and several exceptional pieces of sea glass. I smiled. Our little skunk did like the shiny objects. Good deal. You know he's going to get tired of losing to you one of these days. Axel waved me off and tried to grab my coffee cup, but I smacked his hand away. I loved him, but I wasn't drinking after him. I'd seen some of the stuff he put in that mouth, often from a dumpster. Hard pass. Nah, he said. I think he likes the company. And it's not like I'm taking him for cash, most of the time anyway. What's on your agenda for the day? I had to take Eli to drop his car off. Then we're going for breakfast. After that, we're digging into a trunk we found on a dive yesterday. His furry little black ears perked. As a scavenger at heart, he was always interested when I found treasure. What was in it? He liked being on the boat and went out with us at least half the time. Given his proclivity for shiny objects, his idea of what was valuable wasn't always the same as ours, so it wasn't hard to make him happy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out one of the coins I'd found the day before. It didn't have much monetary value, but the sand had polished it to a sheen. It was right up his alley. Thanks, he said, his beady little black eyes glittering as he turned the coin back and forth so that it caught the sun streaming in through the front window. He jumped off the table and ran to his cubby, then returned a few minutes later. Now, back to the trunk. I told him the story. Rather than ask a million questions, he went silent, his expression thoughtful. Be careful, chick. Something about that doesn't sound right to me. I nodded. I'd already planned on it. I think I should go with you, he said, his tone laced with the gravity I rarely heard from him. It wasn't like him to be serious about anything, but this time he was. Okay, I replied, though I'm sure I'll be fine if you have something you'd rather do. He shook his head. Nope, nothing I'd rather do than check out a mysterious old trunk full of weird objects that may or may not kill you. Come on then, I said, taking the last swig of my coffee. We have to meet Eli and take him to... He waved a sticky paw at me. Just tell me when to meet you. I don't want to run errands and do all that mundane crap. And I'd like to squeeze in a nap. Fine, I said, rolling my eyes as I headed to the door. Meet us at the shop at 10. That's when Jake and I will be there. I grabbed my keys and skipped down the veranda steps to my car, careful not to catch my toe on the uneven, century-old brick pavers. Unlike most modern families, we hadn't gone our separate ways when we'd come of age. There really wasn't any reason to. Our ancestral home was what would, by most standards, be considered a mansion. Even with all 5 of us still at home, there was plenty of elbow room in the 10-bedroom Victorian. Eli even had his own room and had always spent almost as much time there as he did in his own home. I loved my bedroom in particular. It was a turret room that towered high above the rest of the house. So I had soaring ceilings with exposed beams and tall corner-to-corner windows on all 4 sides of the room, with the ocean visible through one of them. When I was young, Dad would enchant the ceiling to look like a starry sky, and Eli and I would pretend we were on a ship having a pirate adventure, or sometimes we'd pretend we were just camping. To be fair, it was as close as either of us ever got to actual camping. We both hated bugs, sand, and the idea of snakes crawling into our sleeping bags or gators grabbing us while we were unconscious. All real threats in Florida. I smiled at the memories as I drove around the circular drive, then down the lane that led me through the tall wrought iron gates. Tall shrubs set behind the spiked fence on either side of the gates offered privacy, hiding the lush front lawn that was shaded by several tall oaks draped in Spanish moss. I loved our home, and being in close proximity to my family, even if they did make me a little nuts sometimes, was something I didn't want to give up. It only took me 10 minutes to get to Joe's. Eli was ready and waiting when I pulled in, and he was in the car and shutting the door before I had time to do much more than wave at Joey, the owner's son. We'd gone through school together and had even gone on a couple of dates. Let's go, Eli grumbled. You can flirt later, Miss Mary Sunshine. I raised a brow at him. Don't go getting all snippy at me because you're hangry, I said. The man was crankier than a 5-year-old when he hadn't eaten. He cut his eyes at me. My espresso machine died this morning, so unless you want to share its fate, feed me and caffeinate me before spreading any more of that disgusting cheer. What's wrong with you anyway? I'm usually the morning person. That much was true. Usually, I'd have been perfectly happy with a silent ride, but since I'd already been up for 2 hours and had had 3 cups of coffee, I was awake and past the morning grumps. Plus, I was excited about the box. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, tilting my nose up. I'm never anything but joy and light. He snorted. Maybe you should let me out. I'd hate to accidentally get struck by lightning meant for you. That'd pretty much top my morning right off. I gave him a half smile and flicked my blinker on to pull into the crow's nest. 30 minutes later, he was fed, caffeinated, and as ready to face the day as I was. Just as I was pulling onto Dolphin Drive, the street that meandered through Old Town, I got a text from Jake saying he'd overslept and was going to be late. I figured that was going to happen when he didn't come home last night, I told Eli. I checked his room when I'd gotten up, but his bed had not been made. Like me, Jake was not a morning person. If his bed was made at 7 in the morning, it was because he hadn't slept in it. I'm not waiting any longer, Eli said, scowling. I hardly slept a wink waiting for the morning to come. Just because he was out rabble-rousing and couldn't drag his ass out of bed doesn't mean I had to suffer. Since I felt the same way, I wasn't about to disagree. I handed him my phone. Tell him that from me, too. He tapped out the message, then slid my phone back in the console. There, maybe one day he'll learn. 2 seconds later, my phone rang, and I groaned, figuring it was Jake calling to wheedle us into waiting for him. Instead, I hit the answering button on my steering wheel when the marina's number flashed across the caller ID on my console screen. Hey, Tammy, what's up? I asked. Tammy was the marina manager and also a good friend of ours. Eli and I were 2 peas in a pod, but we did have a small group of friends that we occasionally went out to dinner or for drinks with. Oh, thank God you answered, she said, her breathless voice streaming over my stereo speakers. Please tell me you're close and that Eli's with you. I am. And we are, he said. What's going on? Is everything okay? No, she said, it's not. Somebody went through overnight and set all the unattended boats loose. It was windy overnight, so everything down here's a mess. Larry's got you on as his emergency contact after Maris, and they've already left. We're on our way, Eli said, glancing at me with regret. I sighed. The chest was going to have to wait a little longer. It's the end of chapter 6. Hey, we got some new folks sliding in. Nice to see everybody. What do you guys think of the voices? I feel weird doing them, but then I also feel like it kind of helps separate things out. And yes, Mike would make a perfect blind guide. Oh, okay. Thanks, Renee. I'm happy that you are. Okay, well, we'll move on to chapter 7 then. It took us hours to get the sea urchin situated because it had drifted into the middle of the marina and its slip had been blocked by several other adrift vessels. Jake came down to help us, but even with 3 sets of hands, it was still exhausting work. By the time we had her secured, it was already late in the afternoon. Phew, Eli said, collapsing into the passenger seat of my car. That was a lot of work. I hope the security cameras caught the little punks who did it. Tammy said they were all wearing hoodies, I replied. So unless one of them had something unique to identify it, my guess is that they'll get away with it. Yeah, they're in the wind, Jake said, wiping his forehead with the sleeve of his grubby t-shirt as he bent down to talk to us through my driver's window. You guys still want to hang? To go get through the trunk? Absolutely, I said, anticipation pushing away the exhaustion. And this time, I'm not answering my phone. Speaking of, I'd left it in the car while we'd wrangled the boats. I'd lost more than one in the marina and wasn't anxious to repeat the experience. When I picked it up, the message light was blinking. I said, unlocking it and scrolling through my messages. I have 5 messages from Willow asking about the trunk. What about it? Jake asked. You didn't cleanse anything, did you? I shook my head, a little spike of anxiety flashing through me. Of course not. I wonder why she was interested. I figured the backlog of items I cleared for her would have kept her busy for the day. Who knows, Eli said. Let's just get down there. We can deal with it in person. In the 5 minutes it took me to drive from the marina to the intersection of Dolphin Drive and Seafoam Street, I downed an entire bottle of water. The trick to not dying in a Florida summer was staying hydrated. I preached it to every tourist who came through, but it never failed that at least once a week an ambulance had to cart somebody to the urgent care with heat exhaustion, if not outright stroke. What's going on? I asked as I made the turn. The streets were packed with pedestrians, making it hard to navigate the brick-paved street. There's not supposed to be a festival this weekend, is there? Eli lifted a sweaty shoulder. I don't think so, but you never know. He twisted around, looking for signs. There, he said, pointing to a canvas sign strung between two of the oaks that flanked the sidewalk that led to the center of the park. Marauders Bay Jazz Festival? I asked, frowning. I thought that was only in the spring. Why are they doing it now? The city hosted about a gazillion festivals, fairs, and charity events throughout the year, so it wasn't unusual for me to lose track. Oh, he said, leaning back in his seat. They had to cancel it in the spring because that hydrant broke and flooded the park, remember? Boy, did I ever. That day had been a mess. Since it hadn't been canceled in advance, people had still shown up for the event. They tromped across the grass and tracked mud into the gallery all afternoon. It had taken 3 of us to keep the floor clean enough so that nobody would break a neck, but it had ended up being a really good sales day. The two sides of having a store in a touristy area. I'm going to go clean up some, I said. My clothes were sticking to me, and my shirt was caked with crud from the marina. Fortunately, we both always kept a change of clothes there for just such circumstances. Hurry up, he said, crinkling his nose and wiping his forehead on the tail of his pillaging is my cardio tank top. I want to do the same. I feel like a salt block. I grabbed my spare clothes and hustled to the bathroom. I'd barely managed to struggle out of my damp shirt when Eli called to me through the door. Sage, why is the trunk empty? I froze. What do you mean, why is the trunk empty? I didn't take anything out of it. I didn't even move it. I left it sitting right where you and Jake put it last night, I called through the door. Too late, though. Cold raced through my veins and my stomach flip-flopped. I pulled on my clean shirt and rushed out of the bathroom. Sure enough, the trunk was empty. I glanced around, noting that all the inventory I'd cleared the night before was gone too. Willow, I called, pushing through the swinging door that led to the gallery. She's not here. Kylie, from where she was perched on a stool reading a celebrity rag behind the counter. She was interning as a freshman history major from the local college. She said something about not feeling well and had to go home. When was that? Eli asked. When was what? Jake asked as he entered the gallery through the same door we had. And why's the trunk empty? Willow apparently went home sick, I told him. And we don't know why the trunk's empty. That's just what we were trying to find out. Kylie set the magazine and pushed off the stool, her expression concerned. That would be me. I came in early this morning. When I went to make coffee, I saw the trunk and couldn't resist checking it out. Willow told me you found it on a dive yesterday, and when I saw a mirror underneath all the other stuff, I just had to see it. Since I had to move several pieces to get to it, I figured I'd get a jump start on it for you. Everything should be right on your table. I mashed my jaw shut to keep from saying something rude. She was a good egg and a fast learner. It wasn't her fault. She was a little overeager, and it wasn't like she didn't help us unpack shipments all the time. It was part of her job description. There was no logical reason why what she did was wrong. Okay, that was nice of you, Eli said with a smile that passed for genuine. But it's not on the table now. Do you have any idea what might have happened to it? I held up my hand. Before we get to that, Kylie, did you touch anything with your bare hands? She shook her head, causing her blonde ponytail to shake. Absolutely not. I know what a stickler you are, so I used your gloves. I breathed a sigh of relief. I had a special set of gloves that I'd spelled with several different protection enchantments. I'd pounded it into her head that she wasn't to touch anything in the back without wearing them. It may have made me sound like an anal weirdo, but that was better than the alternative when so many of the arcane pieces that we dealt with had bad juju. So the upside was that at least she wasn't going to die. Probably. Okay, that's good. That was exactly what you should have done. Thank you, I said, fighting the freak out bubbling just under my skin. I could tell Eli was doing the same thing, and if I lost it, so would he. Jake was always the cooler head, so I was glad he took the wheel. So if you put them on the table, and they're not there now, do you have any idea what might have happened to them? Kylie lifted a shoulder. The only other person who's been there is Willow. Well, and the guys Miss Dilly sent. Jake, Eli, and I glanced at each other, and my heart raced. What do you mean the guys Miss Dilly sent? Why would she send guys? Miss Dilly was the head of the ladies' auxiliary and was a busybody who liked to have a finger in every pie. For the charity auction, Kylie replied. Willow told me to give her the boxes sitting by your bench when she came. She bit her lip. Did I do something wrong? Kylie followed us to the back room, and she looked ready to cry. I just did what Willow told me, but I can't help but feel that I made a major mistake. I pulled in a calming breath and tried to get a grip as a whole string of worst-case scenarios sped through my mind. Kylie didn't know anything about the magical side of our business, or about anything magical, for that matter, and she'd only been trying to help. No, sweetie, Eli said before I could push back the panic welling in my chest. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. There's just a mix-up between Willow and us is all. You go ahead on back out. Don't worry about it another minute. I added what I hoped was a reassuring smile to his words. She looked unsure. Okay, but if I screwed something up, I'm really sorry. You didn't, I replied. Like Eli said, it's just a mix-up with Willow. I'm sure we'll get it straightened out in no time. Her face brightened. If it helps, I've made a few sales this afternoon. That diadem that Willow put out this morning sold right off the bat, and so did the pocket watch. Also, I whipped my head around. There hadn't been a diadem in the inventory I'd cleansed, so it had to have come from the trunk. Wait, what? I said. She put the diadem in the gallery? Kylie nodded. Right before she left. That and a few other things. Well, a lot of other things, but those two were the ones I really noticed. The diadem was so unique, and my grandfather collects pocket watches, so I always keep an eye out for those. I was sort of bummed when it sold before I had a chance to think about it. The bell above the door tinkled, indicating customers had arrived before I had a chance to process the implications. You go on out and take care of them, Jake said. Everything's just fine. As soon as the door swung shut behind her, I twirled my hand and cast a muffling spell so that we wouldn't be overheard. I had a feeling we weren't going to be able to maintain a whisper. This is not good, I said, raking my hand through my hair. I specifically told Willow that everything on the shelves was ready to go out. I didn't say jack about the stuff on the table. She knows that's where I put stuff that I'm still working on. I whipped my phone out and dialed her number. She answered after the first ring. I didn't bother with niceties before I cut straight to the chase. You're on speaker with me, Jake, and Eli, Willow. What did you do with the stuff that was on my table? I told you the items on the shelves were ready, but I didn't say anything about the pieces on the table. No, she said, using what we liked to call her school teacher voice. She often employed it when she thought one of us was being irrational. You said you'd go through everything, and you'd gone through everything, and it was all ready to tag. Everything on the shelves, I snapped. Not my work table. You didn't specify, Sage. I have the voicemail. The shelves were stuffed full, so I assumed you'd used your work table as overflow. Since you said you'd gone through everything and it was all right for me to tag. Didn't something go off in your head when you saw how dirty everything was? Jake asked. Willow paused. What do you mean? Nothing was dirty. As a matter of fact, it was all in excellent shape. It's a shame that the only things worth much were the diadem, the pocket watch, and the necklace. Jake, Eli, and I looked at each other, trying to figure out how that could be. It had all been at the bottom of the sea for who knew how long, but thinking back, they had been shiny when we'd opened the box. Despite the million questions racing through my brain, I reached deep for the last wisps of my patience. I should have known to specify because Willow didn't pause once she was in go mode. If I'd accidentally said that I'd gone through everything and it was ready and hadn't specified the shelves, it was my own fault. Giving Willow free rein to organize was something I usually did with caution because it didn't matter if it was a closet or a room filled with 100 antiques. She'd make short work of it. It was just how she was wired. Plus, it was just an unfortunate twist of fate. Okay, so you did inventory, right? I asked. Willow always did an inventory of everything. If it had gone through Parker's, we had a record for it. Of course I did, she replied, her tone indignant. I did it according to type, like I always do. I didn't think I needed to spell out what shelf you'd put it on. It's in the inventory book in my office. Okay, Jake said, holding his hand up and shooting me a warning look when I opened my mouth to give her back a little of the snark she'd just given me. We'll sort it out. I did put that book that was with it all on your shelf, though, Willow said. I couldn't recognize the language it was written in, so I figured that was best left to you. That and the actual trunk. Since you didn't get back to me, I didn't know how much to put on it, so I left it. She took a deep breath. I'm really not feeling well, guys. What's the big deal with this stuff anyway? The big deal with it is that we found it on our dive yesterday and it has some nasty magic on it. We set it aside until today so we could all be here, but Kylie took it upon herself to take everything out of the trunk for us, I said. Eli's brow furrowed. Sweetie, what's wrong with you? Exactly. Is it a cold or a headache or what? Did you touch any of the stuff on the table? If you're wondering if I'm cursed, Willow said, I think I'm good. I just have a headache, but I am going to lie down. Call me if you need anything else. Worry washed over me as I disconnected. I had a bad feeling about her, made even worse because we had no idea what we were up against. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. Oh, Mike, we do actually have a store that we're getting ready to connect. Right now it's available on my website, teganmaher.com. And I just made, I didn't make, Tim is the one doing that, but he's made a coffee mug that is based on what I picture Rayanne uses in her coffee shop, at Brew For You. And he also did a coffee cup, and I do them the big coffee cups because I don't like those little tiny normal size ones. I drink too much coffee to mess with that. He made one with a shot of midlife magic on it, and he also made Aunt Addie's "Get Your Poop in a Group" phrase. He made that into a T-shirt, so that's all available on my website. It will be here soon. And Renee, okay, yeah, the coffee mugs. I have one, and I didn't bring it in here to show you. They're the nice big ones, and they're pretty. They got a color around inside, and the handle's a different color. But yeah, they're on my website. And take care. Thank you very, very much for stopping in, Renee. And let's get back to the reading. Chapter 8. As soon as I ended the call, Jake pulled an unfamiliar leather-bound book from my shelf and laid it on the table. Runes decorated the cover, and he ran his finger over them. Don't, Eli said, his tone sharp as he pushed Jake's hand off the cover. My twin snatched his hand back, never for a second getting irritated at Eli's tone. He was never harsh without a reason. Well, at least as long as there wasn't a hot guy, a luscious dessert, or the last cold beer in the equation. What? I asked, stepping aside so he could get a better look. Ancient languages were his thing. Eli put a hand on either side of the book and braced himself on the table while he studied the cover. Like the trunk, it didn't seem to have any water damage at all, which was strange in and of itself. Along with what Willow had said about the artifacts themselves being in pristine shape, none of it was passing the smell test. It's the Honorian alphabet, Eli said, his brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages. Or at least it sort of is. There are a few letters that are Avestan, but my guess is that whoever wrote this didn't mean for just anybody to be able to interpret it. The only reason I recognize it is because I spent a lot of time studying ancient grimoires with Mom. His mom was a European history professor at the local university, but as a witch, magical texts had always fascinated her. Eli got his passion, honestly. So can you interpret it? Jake asked. Eli nodded. I can, but it's going to take me a minute. I haven't read it in ages. He pulled a notebook from the shelf and plucked a purple pen from the caddy by my work light, then pulled out my chair and took a seat. Okay, I can interpret the title on the outside easy enough. It says Catalog of Curses. Then at the bottom it has a date, 1689. I cast him a skeptical look and moved closer to him so that I could see the cover better. That's all it says? That's a lot of scribbles for 3 words. The more I looked, though, the more I recognized some of the carvings, because they were similar to the runes on my armlet. Jake had scooted closer, too. Those are protection runes, he said, right as I figured it out. Although Jake's official area of expertise was fine gems, an area he and Willow shared, one of his hobbies was runes and ancient symbols. Most of us had a witchy specialization on top of our university-provided ones. Oh, I see the date now, I said, squinting to pick out the smaller, superscripty numbers from among the runes. That's odd, though. Most town history has Marauders Bay as being founded in 1716. Eli slid the book over a bit and flicked on my table light so Jake could see it better. Jake pointed to 3 symbols. Yeah, but nobody really knows for sure. Those are all different types of protection runes. But these, he singled out 4 others, are sort of binding runes. Binding, I asked. They bound something in the book? He drew his brows together in concentration. I said sort of. They're not an exact match to any runes I know, so maybe not. Open it. You sure, man? Eli asked, and Jake nodded. The symbols don't make any sense. They're not something you usually see on something like a book. Wait a minute, Jake said, then rushed to the trunk. He pulled his phone out and turned on the flashlight, then bent down to study the trunk. Here, he said, pointing toward a couple of what I thought were scars in the wood. When I looked closer, I could make out more deliberate strokes. These are binding runes. Whatever was in this box wasn't supposed to get out. They added the book in for good measure and put the runes on it, too. But those aren't the same ones as on the book, I pointed out. Eli had done as Jacob had instructed and opened the book. The pages inside were filled with the same sort of text, but it seemed to be arranged into chapters. At the top of each new chapter page, somebody had sketched an item. I picked the book up and flipped through the pages, and wasn't surprised to find that the drawings matched up to the items that had been in the trunk. Let me try something, Jake said, smiling as he pulled the book from my hands. He muttered a few words that I recognized as a revealing spell, but nothing happened. He said. I was sure that'd work. We spent a few moments standing there staring at it, trying to figure out how to make it give up its secrets. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see that it was Willow. Hey, I said when I answered. I thought you were resting. I was, she said, her voice a little wobbly, and I feel like hammered crap. But I did call Miss Dilly and told her I'd accidentally sent some items that I hadn't meant to include. I was too late, though. They've already been sold, and no, she didn't keep track of who bought them. Great, I said, sighing. It looks like we're going to be doing this blind then. All we can hope for is that the situation isn't as bad as we think it is. What? Eli asked. He and Jake were looking at me, suspended in time, awaiting my answer. They're sold, I said, since I hadn't put Willow on speaker. Miss Dilly didn't keep a record. Great, Jake said, pulling in a deep breath. We need to figure out how to get this book to tell us its secrets. And fast. Maybe we're getting all of Twitter for nothing, but I'd rather know that for sure. You should take it to Sybil Blackburn, Willow said. She just got back into town a few weeks ago, and I bet she knows every minute of this town's history. It might save some time off your research if you cut straight to the chase. Yeah, because she lived it, Jake muttered. Nobody knew for sure how old Sybil was, but she'd been around as long as my dad could remember, at seemingly the same age now as she had been when he'd been a kid. She was a strange witch who didn't come to town much, and when she did, she usually wore a glamour. After all, it would be hard to explain to non-magical people how she'd lived there for generations without aging a day. She'd disappear for a few months or even years at a time, but she always came back. The only reason we really knew anything about her at all was because she was the sort of local lore among the magicals. I looked at Eli, then at Jake. I don't think we have much choice, guys. We need answers, and she's the only one I can think of who might have them. There's no need chasing down the diadem or the watch until we know for sure we need to. Great, Jake said. 3 tickets to Creepy Town, coming right up. You two go ahead, and I'll be right behind you. My brother was nothing if not mature and brave. No wonder I'd beaten him to the finish line in the Great Birth Canal race. Okay, we'll stop there for this week. I'll mark our place so we know where to pick up next week. And I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. It was really nice to do this. This kind of relaxes me, but not only that, while I'm sitting here reading, I get ideas for the next book. Like, I kind of want to do the gravy boat. That kind of sounds fun. There are all kinds of things you could do with a haunted gravy boat in a Gulf Coast town. Plus, it's gravy. Who doesn't love gravy? Okay. I am, again, so grateful for everything, for you guys hanging out. I really appreciate you. If you haven't read Mocha's a Murder yet, it is available on Amazon. It's in the Keyhole Lake series, book 17. I'm trying to think of what else I need to remind you of. Nice to meet you too, April. Thanks so much for stopping in. And I'll be doing this again next Wednesday. And I'll also be doing a regular coffee chat either Monday or Friday. But yeah, thanks for coming and hanging out with me. It was nice to meet you too. And I'm trying to think if there's anything new and upcoming else. We do have our Patreon. Mike, thank you, by the way, for joining. I appreciate that. Let me do a clarification. Members of the channel, so I have my Patreon and then I have the channel membership here. If you're wanting access to the membership only audiobooks on YouTube, there's a button right on the YouTube page that says join, and it'll take you, like, it's up where you do the follow and the like. and stuff. So that's where you join for that, to get the behind the scenes or the private audiobooks and other stuff. If you want to do the Patreon, that's more ebook and paperback stuff. So I just wanted, we had a couple people join the Patreon that thought they were joining the YouTube channel. So I just wanted to clarify that. And again, go if you want to check out the new cups. I know you guys are my regulars, and so if you want to go check it out and let me know what you think, just say, yeah, it's cool, yeah, it matches, because you all have been with me forever. Just yeah, do that. Love to I would love to hear what you think. April, you too, because you're actually new to the Keyhole series, so getting your take on that stuff would really be cool too. Just if nothing else, an opinion to let me. I'm not trying to push sales on you. I'm just trying to see what you guys think of it. If it's on point, I kind of talking to avoid it. It feels like sometimes. So anyway, that is all for tonight. And if there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and leave. And thank you very much for joining me. Same time, same place next week. Have a good night and happy reading or listening.